Back at the beginning of the year, when we started our reporting on the 2024 election, Donald Trump was seen as a figure on the decline by the media, which largely ignored his events and campaign rhetoric, by the Democrats, who thought President Biden could beat him easily, and by national Republicans, who blamed him for the party's run of bad results, considering many of Trump's handpicked candidates in the midterms were rejected by swing voters across the country. But now, it's starting to set in. Trump is the overwhelming favorite to be the Republican nominee, and his supporters remain the dominant force in Republican Party politics, regardless of the midterm results. It seems the national parties underestimated Trump's staying power, again. But from a grassroots perspective, there were always signs that Trump's candidacy was capable of finding new life, particularly over the summer, when a string of criminal indictments kept Trump in the news, helped his fundraising numbers, and caused some Republicans to rally around him, especially on the state and local level. So, this August, a few days after Trump was indicted on federal charges related to January 6th, I traveled to a gathering of influential Republicans in a key early voting state. I hope they could help explain the gap between the G.O.P. primary that everyone expected and the one we're seeing right now. Why have Republicans backed and embattled Trump rather than cast him aside? And how come it feels like this primary has ended before it even began? From the New York Times, I'm Ested Herndon. This is The Run-Up. Well, we just got to the fairgrounds. We are walking. It's this huge snaking line of, I'm bad at estimating people, but this has got to be like 1,000 people. This summer, my colleague Anna and I flew down to South Carolina. And they're all in like Sunday best. We're seeing tuxes.
This is past Sunday best.
Yeah. You wouldn't wear this to church. This is like tuxes. This is evening gowns. This is
black tie weather.
This is black tie. Yeah. This is Southern black tie for sure. For the state Republican Party's fundraising dinner, called the Silver Elephant Gala. There's a placard that has the logo of the South Carolina Republican Party and the table number. And then we now see the first course, which is a really drab-looking salad. South Carolina is a deep red state and holds a special place in the Republican primary process. It's the first Southern state to vote, and the demographics of its electorate are much closer to the makeup of national Republicans than other early voting states. All of that has helped South Carolina earn the reputation of being the kingmaker state, the place that picks the candidates who eventually become the Republican nominee, like when Trump won in 2016. And next year, South Carolina Republicans will vote on February 24th, just before Super Tuesday, and when Trump is currently scheduled to stand trial in federal court. So while Iowa and New Hampshire get more attention, South Carolina picks winners, which often makes events like the Silver Elephant Gala a go-to destination for presidential candidates. In 2015, during the last competitive presidential primary among Republicans, candidates Ted Cruz, Rick Perry, Rick Santorum, and South Carolina's own Lindsey Graham all spoke here. But this year, there's only one candidate speaking.
These were South Carolina-specific Trump stickers. It was Trump country on the sticker.
Interesting, this is technically not a Trump event.
Nope.
People are posing with a photo background that says Trump country. Some guests ditched the formal dress code and wore red caps. The whole dinner feels MAGA-themed, except for one somewhat sullen face, hanging out near the media section. Well, first, can you just introduce yourself for the audio?
Mark Sanford.
You got to say more than that.
Okay. Mark Sanford, former governor of South Carolina, former member of Congress, whatnot.
If you want to fill in the whatnot, you can Google it. Mark Sanford was once a dominant name in South Carolina Republican politics. Scandal changed his path a bit. And he also spoke out against Donald Trump. He even ran against him 4 years ago. Now, he's like the ghost of Christmas past. a reminder of a pre-Trump Republican Party, which feels harder and harder to find.
One of the things that is particularly true this year is it feels like it's not even as competitive as maybe some folks might have expected. I'm just curious on your take, like, did you expect the Republican Party to be back here, back in what feels a kind of like Trump-dominant space? I'm looking at the Trump signs here. I'm looking at people passing out stickers. I mean, this feels not like just a Republican Party event. It feels like a Trump event.
Well, one, I'm not wearing a sticker. I don't get it. I mean, these are good people. I've been around these folks literally for 30 years in different political waters. And there's some kind of national groupthink wherein people continue to embrace a guy that is in fact the opposite of the moral code that they live by in their churches and their communities across this state. It's the opposite of the kind of example you would want to set for your kid. I mean, so many things at so many levels don't make sense to me, but it is certainly, to your point, where we are. And until this spell breaks, I mean, it's looking, like you say, much less competitive than I would have presupposed.
Can you help us understand what we're at? What is the silver elephant dinner?
So it's the annual gathering of the party faithful. It's sort of their big fundraiser once a year. I've been coming to these things for years. I was here before Trump. I'll be here after Trump. I will slip out quietly when Trump speaks. Nothing against what's going on here, but I'm not a Trump fan, as has well been chronicled. But I do think it's important to catch up with people you've known for 30 years, 25 years.
What was the first silver elephant? Do you remember?
Well, I first got elected to Congress in 1994. Would have been run in 93, so that's 30 years ago. Wow. Yeah.
And it's the tangible importance of this fundraising, just to give a sense of like, why is it like the kind of big day of the year for the Republican Party in the state?
Yeah, I mean, again, there aren't that many statewide gathering points for party faithful. So what you have here, folks that have been laboring in Marlborough County or Calhoun County or name the county in South Carolina, and this is their one chance a year to get together and have a dinner and celebrate whatever it is that Republicans believe, which I'm not quite sure of these days. But yes, sir.
Yeah, appreciate your time.
Yes, sir. Nice to see you. Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Pleasure.
The party faithful that Sanford is talking about used to mean a particular kind of person. South Carolina Republican lawmakers, lifelong politicians, and state party insiders. And while they're still here, what's different about Trump and his influence on the party is that new people have gotten involved, changing the definition of who the party faithful is and the values of the party itself.
I wish it was mine because I'm 120. I'm not 18, I'm 123.
So that's who I wanted to hear from first.
Hey, how are you? My name
Good.
is Ben Herndon. I'm a reporter with the New York Times. This is Anna. We're talking to people about what brought them to the dinner. I'm saying maybe you wanted to have 5-10 minutes to chat.
Okay.
You look so wary.
Well, because you're the New York Times.
Oh, that's fair. But we're nice people from the New York Times. We're all nice, I would say.
Okay. As long as you're nice.
I promise you. Okay. We're really just asking people what brought you here to the dinner. Are you someone who works in Republican state politics?
Kinda. I just retired from the military, and now I've got the time to get involved. And my oath never expires. It's the way I look at it. So, I became a delegate and a state delegate. I was lucky enough to get voted to be a state delegate. I was a little surprised. I didn't, So just to get involved and learn that, I'm brand new, so it was just the reorg this year in March.
I guess I'm curious because, like you were saying, you were surprised that you had gotten chosen as a delegate, and then I guess what has been the most surprising part as you've kind of entered this more official capacity?
Yeah.
There's a lot of establishment and big donors. Like I said, I'm not. I give $20 a month. That's how I was able to come here. So it's $248 for the year. So I'm not the big donors. I don't have that kind of money. But just the little people like us, we need to rise up because the rich people are doing what's best for them, but it's not best for us.
Would you consider yourself more of a party Republican person or a Trump Republican?
Trump Republican.
Why Trump?
Just because of his policies. He's for the people. That's just my personal opinion. I feel like he's for the people. Promises made, promises kept. Last time when he was in there, he did things that I care about. I mean, I'm not upper class like some of them here. The things that he did when he was in benefited me.
Is there something specifically that he's done that feels like the biggest promise made and kept for you?
Yes, taxes. Because I'm single and I don't have any children, so I pay a lot in taxes, and I noticed it went down in my paycheck, and that makes a big difference when you don't have a lot of money, that little bit. So I'm hoping that they make it permanent and it doesn't change, because I know there's some talk about that, trying to keep up with everything. But
some of the other candidates in the race would say that they would also cut taxes, they would also do things like that. What then brings you back to Trump every time?
Somebody asked me that before. He's just the people's president. He's just so personable. And, I do like Tim Scott and Nikki Haley. She was our governor. She was a great governor. But I don't see it. Now, I would like to see him, like, the other candidates that are in there. Like, I like Vivek Ramaswamy. I do like him. And I do like Tim Scott. I really like Tim Scott, I'd like to see him. Hopefully he'll pick one of those for his vice president, Well,
good. I appreciate us talking. That was really helpful.
Yeah, this was super great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
People like Anne-Marie, who only got involved in politics once Trump came on the scene, feel indebted to him. And they're going to stick by him no matter what. But the newcomers that Trump's brought in aren't a big enough slice of the Republican Party to give Trump the overwhelming lead he has right now. There are other, more traditional Republicans that he's won over. And so I also wanted to talk to one of those longtime Republican insiders, someone who saw the South Carolina Republican Party become Trump country. And unlike Sanford, someone who seemed to change along with it. Not everyone wanted to talk to us, but eventually, Anna and I found someone who would.
My name is Ted. This is Anna. We're from the New York Times. We're talking to people about what, brought them to the silver elephant and how they're thinking about this upcoming presidential primary. You have maybe 5 minutes to chat with us?
What would you like to know?
Oh, well, first we'd like to know about you. If you could tell me your name, if you can tell me where in South Carolina you're from, that would be helpful.
Oh, my name's Milan, and I am from Jasper County, South Carolina, Hardeeville.
Awesome. Can you tell me your role?
I am an executive committee member for Jasper County.
We were at the beginning of the year. We were at the RNC convention in Dana Point. We were talking to the national Republican leadership, and they were saying that they thought there was a real opening for other people. They were saying that maybe Donald Trump wasn't kind of assumed to be that. How do we go from there to this point where every piece of data, every piece of evidence, even here at this event, everything feels real Trumpy?
Well, I don't know who you're talking to, but most people in the Republican Party are behind Trump. And there's a lot of wannabes out there, and there was a lot of wannabes in 2016. Probably the best candidate field ever fielded in the Republican Party in 2016, and Donald Trump made mincemeat of them all, primarily Jeb Bush, and now is no different.
Did you support Donald Trump in 2016?
I did.
Yeah. This time around?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Even more. You said even more so.
Even more so, yeah.
Why is that?
Well, because obviously the left has very much crystallized and mobilized around using government to undermine their chief political adversary, and the judicial system has weaponized around trying to eliminate a presidential frontrunner like it's never happened before in American history. It happens in third world countries. It happens in the Soviet Union. It happens in China. But it's not supposed to happen here, where you use the law and the Justice Department to eliminate a presidential candidate.
Did you expect him to be this far ahead? I mean, did you expect it to be more competitive?
I actually expected it to be a little bit more competitive.
Yeah.
But the indictments obviously are driving people to, it's the process of reverse psychology. If you're trying to take something away from me, then I'm going to say, oh, you can't take that away from me. So I think that's what's happening. The indictments.
The indictments. You think there probably may have been a more competitive primary?
Maybe, yes.
We were just talking to former Governor Sanford earlier today, and he was telling me how the state's kind of Republican Party has changed over the years. Have you seen that change?
I have.
How would you describe it?
I would say it's gotten more conservative and more serious about politics in terms of the division between left and right.
When did that start? What drove that shift?
I think what drove it was the lack of real leadership of the Republican Party at the national level for conservative values and the conservative agenda. And many conservatives in the Republican Party felt betrayed.
That seems specifically true in South Carolina.
Well, I think so. The Republican Party base loves Donald Trump because he speaks for them. He speaks for the everyman, the forgotten man of the Republican Party. And the Bushes didn't do that. The Cheneys didn't do it.
Does the DeSantis do it? Do the Tim Scotts?
No, DeSantis still is a little green around the ears. He needs to put his big boy pants on and realize that the national stage is a different stage. And nothing against Ron DeSantis. He's a fine man. And maybe in 4 years, he'll be ready to compete on the big stage. But right now, Donald Trump sucks all the oxygen out of the room, no matter where you're at. He's just a bomb. People know what they have with him, and they know he's a fighter, and they know he's their champion. He fights. He gets up no matter how much the Democrats throw at him. He gets up and he comes back and he throws punches back. And that's what the Republicans have been craving for decades since Ronald Reagan.
The punch back.
Punch back, yes.
What do you think he's going to talk about tonight?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's a good one. I don't know. I mean, he's going to talk about, he's obviously going to talk about, probably touch on the stolen election. Okay, he's going to do that. Then he's going to touch on his accomplishments. He's obviously, I don't know if he'll start with the indictments, but he'll walk you through why the indictments are all wrong. And then he'll, at some point, turn and paint a vision for the future, and what he will do once he's in.
I mean, kind of interesting that you kind of already have a.
That's what I'm
sense
saying.
of
You
what-
already know what he's going to say. Is it enjoyable?
Yeah.
It's not my first rodeo, but
I'm saying
no,
but you still enjoy it, even though you have heard it before.
Yeah, I really do. It's because everyone's a little bit different. Okay, yes, there's a formula, but everyone's a little bit different, and it just connects. It's just like watching your dad up there doing what your dad does well. And rooting, cheering him on. I
get it. Appreciate it.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And then, the night's official programming got underway. Senator Graham had gone from Trump challenger to his opening act.
People ask, what happened with you and Trump? I said, well, he beat me like a drum, and I acknowledged that he did. He sort of liked hearing that, but we found something in common. I've come to like him, and he likes him, and that gets us through 18 holes of golf.
And soon enough, it was time for Trump himself.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be back in South Carolina. Thank
To Milan's earlier predictions,
you. One of the most important issues of the campaign will be who can rescue our country from the burning wreckage of Bidenomics. You know what that stands for, right?
Trump punched back at the Democrats.
Under Crooked Joe Biden, the radical Democrat communists have piled over $10,000 of job-killing regulatory costs onto the backs of every single American household. And they did this in less than 3 years.
And took some shots at his Republican opponents.
And unlike a guy named Ron DeSanctimonious, has anyone ever heard of him?
Well, mostly just one opponent in particular.
You know that DeSantis, that's the abbreviated name, DeSantis wanted to gut Medicare and 3 times voted against Social Security, including raising the retirement age to 70. And one thing I found about politicians, when they have an initial idea and then they maybe go back, I don't even know what he does, I don't care. He's gotten so low in the polls, we don't watch him very much anymore.
And then,
I mean, I never heard the word indictment. Then all of a sudden, over a period of a couple of weeks, you get 4 indictments.
he narrowed in on the indictments.
They do this to try and win an election. Nobody ever thought it was possible. It's done in third world countries. It's not done in this country. And
Specifically the January 6th case.
it's the craziest thing I've ever seen. He is criticizing the election. And let me tell you, there's a lot to criticize, which you'll find out over the coming weeks. Isn't it terrible that a political opponent, though, can haphazardly charge you with a fake crime in the middle of your campaign in order to interfere with your time, your money, your message, and there's nothing you can do in theory to stop this travesty of justice? Isn't that a shame? You have a campaign, you're doing well.
Instead of relitigating the election from 2020, he was promising payback in 2024.
We are a failing nation. We are a nation in decline. And now these radical left lunatics want to interfere with our elections by using law enforcement, the DOJ, the FBI. It's totally corrupt and we can't let it happen. 2024 is our final, biggest, and most important battle. And I used to say 2016 is going to be the most important election, and it was at the time. This is far more important because our country's at a point where it could fail and fail so seriously. And we're at a point where we could end up in a world war because stupid people are running our country. They have no idea what they're doing.
In fact, in this speech, Trump's promise of retribution seemed like the clear theme of his entire candidacy.
And under our leadership, the forgotten men and women will be forgotten no longer. You will be forgotten no longer. We had it to a level where there's never been a time, we've never been so proud, we've never been a greater democracy than just 3.5 years ago. With your help, your love, and your vote, we will put America first, and we will, I promise you, make America great again. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Governor, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Peggy, thank you. Lindsay, everybody, thank you very much. It's a great honor.
Okay.
What'd you think?
All right. Okay. Good. I got the New York Times. They're hounding me again.
After the speech, we ran into Milan again.
Bye.
I'm glad we ran into you. What did you think of the speech?
I thought it was good. I thought he was a little bit tired, so probably spoke a little longer than maybe he needed to. But he touched all the bases. Actually, he didn't dwell on the past, which I thought was very, very positive.
Yeah, it wasn't about the election.
No, it was about the future primarily, and that's a vision, and that's what people need. They need to know what I'm voting for. And
that version of him, you think, is the nominee?
That's the nominee. Yeah. He doesn't need to really bash too many other candidates. He doesn't need to talk about what happened, how he's been wronged. I think he's mellowed a little bit.
Yeah, it does feel like there's a little bit of a mellow. Even at the same time, he did do some DeSantis. That was not mellow.
He's still the big dog.
Yeah.
You know, he's the big dog, and he wants everybody to know that. But that's what makes him a great world leader, too, because he lets everybody know who's in charge.
It's dawning on me that the first people we talked to at the beginning of the year were that kind of Republican national leadership at the top. And that's where we were seeing people who are a little less into Trump. On the state levels, that's where he has the real strength, even among party leadership. Is there a disconnect between maybe national Republicans and how they view this and the state level?
Absolutely there is. The national Republicans, truth be told, are all jealous of Trump because Trump is somebody who's not a politician. He came out of political nowhere, and he grabbed the hearts of the American people. And he identifies with the American people, and they identify with him. You could put every Republican politician in the last 30 years together on a stage in one night, in one city, and in one stadium, and they couldn't fill that stadium up with all of them. Trump can fill by himself a stadium every night across the country. That's the difference. They are jealous of the fact that he resonates with the American people.
Cool. I'm glad we caught up with you. I really appreciate
man.
it. Have a good day.
At the Silver Elephant Gala, I felt the distance between what the National Republican Party thought the 2024 primary would be and what it actually was. The idea of a truly open and competitive primary ignores the fact that for these people, to abandon Trump now would be an act of betrayal, especially since he's under legal threat. And so for them, it's never been a question of who the nominee should be, just when the National Party would realize it. After the break, a deeper look at Trump's campaign promises. As the year has gone on, I've thought back to the Silver Elephant Gala, seeing Trump speak there, ignoring his primary challengers, and thinking only about the indictments and the general election. In some ways, it was the same Trump we had gotten used to, with familiar themes like Build the Wall and Drain the Swamp. But in other ways, it also felt a little different, more focused on vengeance and retribution. And after his legal challenges, even more willing to upend democratic norms.
Hey, brother.
Hey, I'm glad we're doing this. Where are you? Are you in D.C.? So last week, I called my colleague, Jonathan Swan. Can you first tell me how long you've been covering Donald Trump?
I've been covering Donald Trump since 2015. I covered his presidency and then his post-presidency as well. So it's been a while.
Going on year 8? Let me do some.
Yeah.
8, 9?
Yeah. Feels like longer, but
yeah,
you know.
Yeah, I imagine so. Jonathan's a political reporter at The Times. And he's part of the reporting team who know the inner workings of Trump world basically better than anyone else. It's our sense that this version of Donald Trump is a different version than the one that the country came to know in 2016 and in 2020. You deal with this campaign every day. I wanted to pose that to you. Do you feel like this is a different version of kind of Trump in Trump world?
I don't think he himself has changed a ton. What's changed? I think a few things have changed. Number one, he's more focused on retribution. He really does feel a deep sense. He's always had a feeling that elites look down on him and whatever. But now it's sharpened because what he believes and says is that they're trying to lock him up, deprive him of his freedom. There's the vengeance aspect to it. But there's also something that's much more important than anything that's changed within Donald Trump himself, which is the system has changed.
What do you mean?
The guardrails that existed to stop him in the first term have weakened. If he gets reelected, will have a different judiciary in 2025. It will be a judiciary that he largely shaped. At the highest level, it's obviously conservative Supreme Court, but it's also a federal judiciary stacked with young, ideologically conservative judges that Donald Trump himself appointed. The other thing that's changed is the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. In his first term, there were still Republicans who were willing to stand up to him. You had people like John McCain. You had people like Mitt Romney. Most of these people have been driven out of politics or retired, or life has become too intolerable being a Trump opponent, or they've been defeated in primaries by pro-Trump challengers. So you're going to have a much more supine Republican Party. And so if Donald Trump gets through the trials of next year and gets elected, he will be a far more powerful, far more emboldened figure than he was in 2017. And frankly, a figure who is surrounded by people who've learned a lot about how to wield power and operate the levers of power than the team he came in with in 2017, people around him that are trying to restrain him or see their view as see themselves as people like John Kelly, his chief of staff, and James Mattis, his defense secretary, did as protecting the country from Donald Trump. Those types of people will not be around Donald Trump in a second term.
You're saying that the structures in place have made the same person maybe express differently, or maybe this is the Donald Trump that has been the same kind of at his core for a long time.
For anyone willing to open their ears and open their eyes and pay attention, same person. All those ingredients were always there. It's just now he's learned a lot about how to wield power. The people around him have learned even more about how to wield power. The restraints have been weakened or exposed, and he's built an incredible following. All the ingredients are there if he gets back in for him to be a president that consolidates and centralizes power in a way that we haven't seen in this country for a very long time.
Well, before we get to what might happen if he wins, let's stay focused for a moment on his current campaign. You mentioned that he's more focused on vengeance and retribution. Is that because of the impact of these indictments and the looming prospect of these criminal trials? Like, is that why we are seeing this version of Donald Trump talk so much more about retribution?
It's definitely a big element of it. Having 91 felony charges in 4 different jurisdictions does have an effect on the mind. It does focus the mind. And he's been very open about this. Again, this is not secret. There's nothing secret about it. He is on the record in June publicly promised to appoint what he called a quote-unquote real special prosecutor to quote-unquote go after Joe Biden and the entire quote-unquote Biden crime family. So, this is not like some secret plot. He's very openly saying that he wants to do this, that he wants to take personal control over the Justice Department and direct prosecutions and investigations.
When we saw him in South Carolina, it was right after the January 6th indictment had come down. And it was a really kind of clear articulation from the people there that some of those indictments made them like him or feel the need to rally around him even more. One of the other things that stuck out was that Donald Trump himself seemed a little more dour. And I couldn't tell whether it was because the indictments had just come down or whether these things have kind of personally taken a toll on him. In your reporting, is there any sense of how these indictments affected Donald Trump, the person?
At the time, he's been enraged at all of them. And actually, at the same time, I also think he sort of, in some ways, derives energy from it. I think when we look back, if Donald Trump wins this election, the FBI going to Mar-a-Lago, executing that search warrant in the summer of 2022 will be a turning point. I think that first indictment in New York from Alvin Bragg will be another turning point in that we saw the Republican base really rise up in defense of Donald Trump, almost like their antibodies were triggered that had been sort of cultivated for the last 6 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's partly what I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
We were outside the courthouse when, people who are supporters of Trump were making the prediction that, this was going to make him more popular, at least among the Republican base, even as the kind of Republican opponents were kind of hoping that it inevitably caused support to fall off. I mean, I'm asking for those people who are inside the Trump campaign, how did they kind of pull this off? And who are the figures who are currently around him? Because the inner circle used to be so famous. I'm thinking about the Steve Bannons, the Ivankas and Jareds, the Hope Hickses. Is that the same group of people around him? It doesn't seem like it.
No. Well, there is some continuity. His top political advisor is Susie Wiles. She's been with him since 2016. She's a veteran Florida operative who famously worked for Ron DeSantis and had a big falling out with Ron DeSantis. So there's a lot of bad blood there in terms of Trump now competing against DeSantis in this primary. Chris LaCivita, again, a veteran political operative. Trump probably has the most cohesive political team he's ever had in the 8 years since he's been in national politics. And
in terms of consistency, what do you mean by that, cohesive?
In terms of not trying to tear each other apart
Okay.
and infighting and whatever, but also, frankly, the way they've been operating. And I'll give you a really important example. You often hear people speculate about, well, what happens if Donald Trump gets convicted and sentenced or convicted before the Republican convention?
Yeah, this is something we were exploring
July,
last week. Yeah.
Right? okay, well, will all the delegates get together and overthrow him at the convention? Well, no, they won't, because what Donald Trump's team has done very methodically, very skillfully, much more methodically than any other campaign, is they have, as Trump would use the word, rigged the system in the way that Trump used to claim Hillary Clinton did back in 2016. But basically, all the state parties, not all of them, I'm being slightly hyperbolic here, but Trump himself has developed deep personal relationships with a lot of the people who run the state parties around the country. In some cases, like Nevada, to the point where the chairman could be viewed as a Trump operative. Mm-hmm. Okay? And so the delegates are going to be Trump people. Mm-hmm. So will they be overthrown? No, they won't be overthrown, because they're actually, a lot of these people, personally loyal to Donald Trump, that feel a sense of obligation to him, that he's hosted at Mar-a-Lago for dinner, that he's courted, that feel a connection to him. So even if some crazy thing happens, they've basically created an insurance policy for themselves. And it's been a really long-term, careful, methodical project. We've written about it, but it's important. And I still think there is a perception out there. I hear it myself from people who are pretty engaged in politics, actually, but not covering Donald Trump, who sort of have the perception that it's basically Donald Trump surrounded by a bunch of circus clowns, using finger paint. And it's really not that. I could argue he's had a far more sophisticated political operation than any other campaign he's competing against. And that's not what people think about when they think about Donald Trump, but that's the reality.
So there's a little more discipline around him, a little more strategy around him. One of the things we wanted to focus on before the policy promises of this campaign is what Trump's day-to-day kind of looks like. One thing that really struck us when we hear him on the trail is how kind of like news responsive he is. Like he's mentioning polls from that week. He's mentioning kind of TV segments from the last couple days. It's unique to have a candidate kind of punditize their own campaign, like as they're doing it. I kind of wondered, like, how does that happen? Like, do we know kind of what his media diet is? Is he watching as much TV as I think we used to associate with him in the White House? Is any of that clear this time around?
Yeah, I mean, he's always done this sort of real-time punditry on his own campaign. This has been a feature of Trump back in 2016. Yes, he has aides who print off all kinds of articles for him. He has aides that collect tweets, print out tweets of people saying nice things about him. He has aides that collect news clips that they think he'll find interesting, including about his enemies. He watches a huge amount of television, always has, cable television, and he watches he watches Fox, he watches MSNBC, he watches CNN, tunes into all of it. And none of that's changed. He's not really, he's ramping it up a little bit now, but it hasn't actually been a campaign. I think that's the thing that can't be underscored enough, which is that basically what Trump has done since announcing in November last year is he's played golf every day. He's stayed at his properties. He's schmoozed people, and he's done very little campaigning.
Yeah.
But it's worked for him. People used to talk about Biden's basement strategy in 2020, where Biden really did very little active campaigning during the coronavirus. Trump has had his own version of that this time around. But yet he's still been sort of omnipresent in the news, and I think feels more visible because of all these indictments and all the controversy and what have you. So he has the sort of perception of being everywhere at once, even though the daily reality is he's basically been on the golf course.
Yeah. So you were alluding earlier to the ways that Trump and the Trump campaign have learned and grown over these years, kind of evolved. And I know you've been part of this ambitious reporting project that's aimed at understanding the impact of all that and what it could mean for Trump in 2025 if he were to win. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, the project grew out of reporting I did last year at Axios, looking at what a second Trump term would entail and some of his more radical proposals. It's grown into a much deeper project this year with my colleagues Maggie Haberman and Charlie Savage. And what we've done is we've focused on a few different elements. One is we've looked at the theme of independence. Trump and his allies are basically taking the unitary executive theory, this idea that all executive power is vested in the human being of the President of the United States and that any checks to that power within the executive branch are unconstitutional. They've taken that theory to its logical extreme. And so they don't believe that the Justice Department should be independent in terms of doing investigations, for example. That's a norm that has existed since Watergate. They don't believe that there should be independent agencies within the federal government. So that's one theme. Another theme we've looked at is we've focused on policies that are not standard issue Republican policies. It's obvious, yes, what's Donald Trump going to do on environmental policy? It's important, of course. He's going to unwind a whole bunch of regulations, climate regulations that Joe Biden has put in place. That's important. I'm not minimizing the importance of it, but it's also what Republican President Jeb Bush or pick your standard issue Republican would do. We focused on what Trump policies that he is going to implement that go beyond in different ways the standard issue Republican. Another one is immigration. Trump has promised the largest domestic deportation operation in American history, and we interviewed his top immigration advisor, Stephen Miller, on the record extensively, and we're looking at. People forget Trump did a lot on immigration in his first term. He'd basically, under the cover of the pandemic, invalidated the asylum system in this country. So they learned a lot about how to manipulate the system over those 4 years. They're just going to step this up to another degree in the second term. So we're talking about sweeping raids, mass detention camps, deportations, they hope, on the scale of in the millions per year, where it's in the hundreds of thousands right now. So hugely disruptive policies. So those are some of the things we've focused on, and we've done less on, we haven't done a piece saying, well, he's probably going to cut taxes because, sure, he'll maybe try and cut taxes, but that we've focused on what is aberrational in his program.
Yeah, and I think this, this brings me back to kind of a discussion I remember when Trump was running the first time about whether to take them literally or figuratively, whether we should take those campaign promises seriously. And I think one of the things that became really clear during his time in office was that whether it was him or the people around him, there are people who are being very serious about even the most radical of those promises. And so I like how this project makes clear that specifically with this version of Trump and the people around him, those promises are ones that voters should have a clear understanding of. I want to walk through them kind of one by one. You mentioned the question of independence and how Donald Trump is currently promising to transform the Justice Department. He's long attacked the deep state. He long has promised to drain the swamp, even back in 2016. How are these promises different than that?
Well, it all begins with who you appoint as your Attorney General. Mm-hmm. So Donald Trump appointed Jeff Sessions as his Attorney General. And as you remember, Jeff Sessions, his first most important act was recusing himself from the Russia investigation, which earned him Donald Trump's permanent rage and ire and et cetera. So Jeff Sessions was effectively an institutionalist, as much as people, on the left were horrified at his appointment. He still had a set of rules that he abided by. Donald Trump, he's learned his lesson. Don't appoint anyone where there's any doubt about whether they're going to act independently. Mm-hmm. They work for me. They're my lawyer. And they work for me. It's my Justice Department. That's where we're operating from.
And I want to do this also on immigration. We remember so specifically build the wall as the promise, and we remember Donald Trump as kind of pitching himself as immigration enforcement in big capital letters. How is what he is promising now different than the promises from 2016 to 20?
Well, again, I think there's a lot of Donald Trump didn't fulfill his promises on immigration and they focus on the wall. Well, actually, he did a ton on immigration, very aggressive stuff that if it wasn't for the pandemic, it would have been probably the biggest story of 2020. They effectively invalidated the asylum system. They made it virtually impossible to seek asylum in the United States. Mm-hmm. They deported a lot of people. They actually did build quite a lot of wall, and they appropriated more. They got more money for the wall than Congress appropriated. And another norm they broke. They diverted Pentagon money to pay for some of the wall. Yes, they didn't build the wall completely. Yes, they didn't get Mexico to pay for it. But they did a lot. They did a lot on immigration, and they learned a lot. A lot of what they did happened in 2019 and 2020 when they'd really started to understand how to work the system and how to implement policy that gave them a better chance of winning in court. Someone like Stephen Miller, who'd never served in federal government before, learned a lot over those 4 years and would be coming back with a much greater knowledge of how the system works and what needs to be done to affect policy.
The last policy area that you all highlighted in the story that we really wanted to focus on was the expansion of executive powers. Can you explain what that means and how Trump and his allies plan, why that is important to them?
Well, Donald Trump was always frustrated when he was in the job as in his first term by restraints against his power as president. And he would talk to conservatives who were of the unitary executive school who basically said, you have much more, your power should be far less restrained than it is. And there's nothing in the Constitution that suggests that there should be anyone in the executive branch who should act independently from you. They all work for you ultimately. So Donald Trump, of course, is not a student of the Federalist Papers. He doesn't think about the finer points of constitutional law, but that's a very appealing thing to hear if you're Donald Trump, if you're searching for ways to basically get what you want. Donald Trump himself is not saying, I want to strengthen executive power. No, Donald Trump just wants what Donald Trump wants. And if there's an impediment to that, he wants to get rid of it. So the people who are coming up with legal theories to justify that are just useful to that end. It's not like Donald Trump is some unitary executive theologian who's like, deep in the text reading about this stuff. These are just useful, allies because they're supporting something he inherently wants.
There's a school of conservative thought that has tried to make an argument for a long time that the president had kind of untapped power that was kind of existing outside our traditional system of checks and balances. And then there's a guy who wants to seek that power, but is not necessarily, kind of in the legal theory school, but they found a kind of convenient match in each other.
Yes, very much so.
So Trump is promising a more radicalized agenda that will fundamentally transform many American institutions, and he's doing it quite openly while still leading the Republican primary. One of the questions we have, and one of the things we're going to explore over the next couple weeks, is as we talk to Republican voters specifically closer to primary season, do you think Trump is leading among Republicans in spite of these promises or because of them?
I think Donald Trump transcends any particular policy promises that he makes. I think he's become such a powerful cultural figure at this point. Ben Jacobs, who's a friend of mine, wrote, I thought, a very smart piece saying, Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis have partisans. Donald Trump has fans. And you see that in a very vivid way at his events. Like, I've never in my lifetime seen at a political event as many people having the image and likeness of the person literally wearing, their socks or it's merchandise.
There's a fashion at Trump events. There's a way to dress.
More like a rock concert and he really does lead a movement, and that's unique not only in the Republican field, it's unique in American politics right now. Joe Biden doesn't lead a movement. Donald Trump leads a movement. So yes, I think basically all of this stuff fits into that, but none of these individual policies are the key to his appeal. His appeal transcends all of this stuff.
Thank you so much.
No worries, mate. Thanks for having me.
What Jonathan outlined explains what we saw over the summer at the Silver Elephant Gala. Not a traditional relationship between candidate and voter, but an unbreakable bond between Trump and his base, which functions more like a social movement than a typical presidential campaign. This isn't entirely new, but it remains vitally important, especially considering what Trump is promising this time around. To do more than be a president that makes America great again, but to reshape the powers of the presidency itself. That's the run-up for December 7th, 2023. Now, the rundown. Last night in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, 4 candidates took the stage at the 4th Republican primary debate. Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, and the late addition, Chris Christie. Earlier this week,
more breaking news from the 2024 presidential campaign trail moments ago. North Dakota Republican Governor Doug Burgum announced that he is suspending his presidential campaign.
Governor Burgum was in the race for 7 months. In the end, he spent nearly $12 million of his own dollars on his ill-fated run. There are now 7 candidates left in the GOP primary. The clear frontrunner, Donald Trump, was again absent from last night's debate. But
I want to go back to this one issue, though, because the media has been focused on this and attacking you. Under no circumstances, you are promising America tonight you would never abuse power as retribution against anybody.
At a Fox News town hall in Iowa on Tuesday, moderator Sean Hannity asked Trump about potential abuses of power if he returns to office.
Except for day one.
Except
Look,
what?
He's going crazy. Except for day one.
Meaning?
When Hannity pressed for clarity, Trump elaborated.
We love this guy. He says, "You're not going to be a dictator, are you?" I said, no, other than day one. We're closing the border, and we're drilling. After that, I'm not a dictator.
So that sounds to me like you're going back to the...
There are 5 weeks and 4 days till the Iowa caucuses, and 334 days till the general election. We'll see you next week. The Run-Up is reported by me, Ested Herndon, and produced by Elisa Gutierrez, Caitlin O'Keefe, and Anna Foley. It's edited by Rachel Dry, Lisa Tobin, and Franny Kartoff, with original music by Dan Powell, Marian Lozano, Pat McCusker, Diane Wong, and Elishaba Itu. It was mixed by Sophia Landman and fact-checked by Caitlin Love. Special thanks to Paula Schumann, Sam Dolnick, Larissa Anderson, David Haufinger, Mahima Chablani, Renan Borelli, Jeffrey Miranda, and Maddie Masiello. If you have questions about the 2024 election, we're working on a new Q&A segment, and we want to hear from you. Email us at therunup@nytimes.com. And finally, if you like the show and want to get updates on our latest episodes, follow our feed wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much for listening, y'all.